But this is Alyne Pustanio. I know you've been communicating with Bernadine LeBlanc, and
Yep.
our other host, Pete Haviland, is with us as well. And I want to say your name correctly, and I've been saying
Dacre.
Dacre. I
Yep.
was right. I
You
was
got it.
right. Dacre Stoker. So welcome to the show. We're happy to have you. Thanks for joining us.
You're most welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Good. And we want to get into it, but I want to read a little bit of your bio. Just what you sent. You are, and someone asked me whether you're related to Stoker, and I'm like, yeah, I think so. Here's the last name. You're the
Yeah,
great.
that's it.
That's the guy. You're the great grandnephew of Bram Stoker. And you
That's
are the
correct.
international
Yep.
best-selling co-author of Dracula the Undead in 2009. And it's endorsed, the official Stoker family endorsed sequel to Dracula. Dacre is also the co-editor with Elizabeth Miller of The Last Journal of Bram Stoker, The Dublin Years, which was published in 2012. And your latest novel is Dracul, a prequel, I'm sorry, to Dracula. And it was released last year. Oh, well, 2 years ago. No, yes. Well, I don't even know what year it is. 2018, last year in October. And it's everywhere. In America, North America, South America, Spain, Italy, and even Paramount Studios has purchased the film rights. But you weren't always an author. You were an athletics coach, I believe is what it was. We'll let you tell us about that. So welcome. And
Well,
just
thank you.
tell us a little bit about yourself.
I was born in Montreal, Canada. Born and raised there. Long before I sort of got too interested in the Dracula gig. Funnily enough, everybody asks, what was it like being born into the Stoker family? I said, well, it's not like the Munsters or the Addams family. It was really quite normal. Um, and I grew up being very interested in sports, and I actually sort of pushed myself to make the Olympic team for Canada in a sport called modern pentathlon in 1980, but unfortunately that was a boycott year, so I kind of got burned on that one, but then ended up becoming a teacher and a coach, and ended up coaching the Canadian pentathlon team, the first the ladies team and then the men's team, and that got me to the Olympic Games in '88. So that's sort of my sporting side of my life. But the Dracula side was, not quite so glamorous at the start. I did find out somewhere at the age of 12 or 13 when I asked my dad about some of the books on the bookshelf that we had that one of them was a first edition of Dracula signed by Bram to his mother. And I thought that was pretty cool. But what's it all about? How are we connected? And he said that Bram's youngest brother, George Stoker, who was a doctor and a very, very close to his older brother Bram, was our great grandfather. And his son came to Canada after World War One, and he got married, and he started the Montreal Stock Exchange, and that's how we came to be. And as years went on, I, read the book, and when I was in college, I actually had to do a research project on an author, and that was sort of, now we're sort of mid 70s. And I decided, okay, now it's time to learn what I can about Bram Stoker. And I was lucky enough to pick up a book called In Search of Dracula by McNally and Florescu, who were two Boston College professors who wrote probably the first book that explained to the world who Bram Stoker was, where he found his information about Vlad Dracula, Vlad the Impaler from Transylvania, and they kind of connected a lot of dots. Some of the things were not exactly right because they didn't have access to a lot of things, but that's what really got the ball rolling. So that's how I got into this, sort of mid-70s, and as you mentioned, I ended up co-authoring a couple of fictional books and nonfiction, and I'm kind of still going strong to this day, very interested in it, and had become, both a resource to people who are interested in getting their scripts right, or depicting Bram in a novel properly, or being involved in writing my own stuff.
Mm.
So that's the short story.
Well, we were all forced to read that book in school at some point. And I don't mean forced in a bad way. I actually still have my high school copy of it, and it's falling apart because I've read it multiple times. I'm talking about Dracula.
Yeah, yeah.
And there's, and beyond Dracula, um, there really wasn't much more that we were taught or that we knew about Bram Stoker. I mean, it was enough to know, and it was really an inspiration too. It was a unique style because of the diary and the letters,
Yes.
etc.
Yeah.
And that was a unique style, and it caught my attention. But it also, when I began to look behind the man, behind the book, I learned that he never went. Or at that point, at the time he wrote the novel, he had never been to Eastern Europe or Romania, never seen the
That's right.
Carpathians, and that's astonishing for me right there, because that's a I mean, it's just so atmospheric. It's so evocative of, the whole entire folklore full of strigoi, and just the vampires and, not zombies necessarily, but werewolves and etc. And it's so linked to Eastern Europe. For him to be able to put that together, it's like putting you right there in the middle of the
Yeah.
story. So I've
Well,
loved
well,
that.
a lot of people don't. I mean, you're a prime example of, your teacher obviously knew that as a high schooler, you needed to get a good example of Gothic literature, and this was, one of the books. Frankenstein's another, and
Hmm.
great examples. But they don't all have access to the notes of Dracula and some of the other cool things that you really have to dig around because they're just not readily available. And there's, I don't want to date you, but back when I was growing up, I didn't know of any other biographies that were around. But some go back to, the 60s, but they're not also readily available to a high school teacher. You just don't go to a library and pull out a biography of Bram Stoker. They're not all that popular.
Right.
So,
Not at, I mean, you could find a lot about Romania and Transylvania.
right,
Just, I mean, but
but
you had, yeah, it
but
was
not
not
Uncle
like it
Bram.
is. Right. Nothing,
I'll
and
tell you
nothing
one.
personal of anything, because,
No, that's
obviously.
just he was a quiet kind of guy that went around doing his work. He was a manager, acting manager for the most famous Shakespearean actor of the time, which put him, at the head of sort of the socialites in London, because this was the form of entertainment. But on his
Mm.
side, on his holidays and his free time, he was writing, and when he was not writing, he was researching, and that kind of comes back to what you said about how does a guy write a novel that tricks so many people into thinking that he'd been there, because he described the Carpathians, he described the people, described the forests and the food they're eating, and he had the times correct on how long it would take for train schedules, the
Mhm.
carriages to go from A to B. Well, this is the guy that I've come to know. This is the guy that when he was growing up, Bram not only was a decent student at Trinity College, but he had a part-time job as a clerk in the petty sessions judicial system, which means he was, in charge of making sure everything got filed properly, all the penalties were handed out properly. So he was very anal and very organized when it came to things. And he was a detailed kind of guy. He was also heavily into mathematics in school, so he was good with the books. So
Mm.
when it came time to him to research Dracula, and lucky enough, we can verify this because his notes for the novel Dracula sit in a museum in Philadelphia called the Rosenbach Museum. It's a literary museum. And in those notes, we get a really good picture of what he was trying to do. And thank goodness, he also listed all of the books that he used for research. And I'll tell you something very cool, because this is the first podcast I've been on since this has been discovered. But the London Library in London, England, about 4 or 5 months ago, discovered that Bram was a member there. They knew that part. It was a membership library, not just when you walk in off the street and pay a couple bucks and you become a member. You had to pay a big subscription. But this guy who was in Philip Spedding, in charge of fundraising, is a big fan of Dracula, and he looked at these notes and looked at all the books listed in the back. So I wonder how many of those are here. And he found every single book that
Oh.
Bram listed was in their library. So he went one step further. He took every book out of the shelves, put them in his office, and started looking through it. And lo and behold, they had strange little markings in the margins.
Hmm.
And he started cross-referencing those notes and those marks and those underlinings and those little words he wrote to the Dracula notes and to a Dracula novel. And so he'd see something written by, and one of the more exciting ones was Emily Gerard, who was a Scottish lady living over in Romania. And she wrote all about Strigoi, Nosferatu, Sholomons, all these kind of weird and interesting superstitions and folklore. And they all matched up that what he pulled out of these books. So they were able to figure out that the Linden Library was ground zero for Bram's research. But not only that, it demystified how Bram got everything so accurate. They had all these travel guides. So, you know, nowadays we go look on Google if we want to figure out where we're going to go, how long it's going to take us. In those days, you picked up the Baedeker guide or the Hutchinson's guide or these different guidebooks. And luckily, people had been there that Bram had not. And they described all the things that Bram needed to use to describe his story. And so he you know, he didn't plagiarize, but he got the idea from what they are telling. And he said, okay, you know, as you're driving through the mountains, the snow-capped mountains, and the forests look like this, and the trees this. He made us believe he was there because he did a heck of a good job on all his research, which gave it a very realistic feel.
Absolutely. That is astonishing. And it's people don't really stop to look, I mean, stop to think about it unless they actually look at these sources that in that day and time, young men would come, you know, come of age before being married. They'd graduate from university or whatever. They would go on what was called the Grand Tour, and they would go through Europe, or they would go, you know, Europe and Eastern Europe, or they go through Russia. They would tour all of these areas so that when they came back, they were a well-rounded individual. And all of those people that did that, men and women who went with them, took copious amounts of notes because they were all going to be published in journals for this society or journals for that society or whatever. Those are gold mines. Those are, and that's exactly what Bram found. To the extent that I read an article years ago on online about someone, and I can't remember who it is, who basically went there and was basically following what Bram put down as I went here and I went, or he went here, he went there, and he followed it. And then he, you know, eventually with the goal of going to Dracula's castle, the castle that they used to the letter. I mean, he looked over here and there with a sheer, you know, drop offs of the Carpathian Mountain, exactly as he described it, in a country that is behind time as far as, you know, as far as catching up with modern times. So and I'm doing a lot of research. Hello, I'm sorry. We had somebody, I guess somebody popped in, but I'm doing a lot of research, and those are the kind of things that I'm coming across, the gold mines of these long gone, hopefully, you know, just sort of like forgotten books, basically, just published by, you know, universities or stuck up in university libraries and all. And that, you know, that's helping me in what I'm writing, because I like to write the Gothic style. And so, you know, Dracula is the ground zero for all of that, and like you said, Shelley and all that. But those people, we don't do that these days. We'll go on Expedia and go on Google, and you know, we got the picture and all this. But the way that they wrote every detail, and they talked to the people that were there, and they wrote every detail that those people told them. And it's just a gold mine. It's a wonderful thing. So you're telling me, and this is the reason I'm saying all this, is that actually works. So because I'm retroactively building something like that as well, because I write. What I'm writing right now requires that, you know, like I can't take the diligence from, you know, Budapest to wherever, but, you know, I can read somebody who did, and then just as he did, you know, translate it. But I've got two other hosts I know that have questions for you. I want to bring you guys in. Bernadine, you go first, and then Pete, you come in whenever you're ready.
I was wondering, what do you feel about the culture, I guess you would call it a culture, communities, like in New Orleans, we have like the vampire community, like it's still going on and on and on and on. I don't know, you know, how far back it goes. I don't know if they even do that where you are.
You're talking about Anne Rice?
No, I'm talking about like the whole communities.
Yeah, the people that really practice voluntary vampirism. Right. I've actually been there a couple of times, and I'm a very open-minded person, and luckily enough, I've had good contacts with people, and I was very, very interested to learn more about this community, and I met a number of these folks, And I think it's, in this day and age, there's all kinds of interesting different cultural groups that have different beliefs and how they want to run their lives, and it's very nice that it's all can be accommodated in many ways. And I think a lot of people might get the wrong impression, like, oh my God, they're practicing vampirism. Are they whack jobs, or what's the deal? But in this case, here's how it's explained to me by some of these people firsthand, that they just feel they need a small amount of blood, from a willing donor, and the experience of the sharing is very kind of clean and safe, because they both make sure donor and the receiver also make sure they have their cards from the hospital, make sure they don't have any contagious disease, and it's kind of like candlelit, and very much like going on a date type thing, and it's spiritual as well as physical, and they exchange a little bit of blood, and they don't go out and take anybody's blood without their consent, and they don't like to publicize it too much, but it works for them, and they feel that whatever condition that they have, that modern medicine isn't able to deal with it, so sharing of blood is what works best for them. And you know what? That's cool. All the power to them. And I think that in New Orleans, and I've heard from some of my friends that there's these cultures in different cities, but New Orleans is a wonderful place, which all kinds of interesting melting pot of cultures and beliefs are permitted to exist there, and this is a great place for this to exist, and nobody cares too much about it.
Mm.
Yeah, I think they actually have a club. Alyne, do you know about that? Where they actually, I don't think it's real blood that they're drinking, but the whole thing is focused on vampires, like the shot glasses, the drinks are red. They have these IV bags with looks like blood, but it's not blood.
Well,
it's not an underground community anymore.
No,
now
no.
it's well known.
But it's not as big as it was. That's why I was like, in New Orleans, it pivots around Anne Rice and the Vampire Chronicles and Interview with the Vampire specifically. That caught fire and burned, burned the house down. I mean, when that caught big, and I read it, and you were in college in the 70s. You said I was in high school. I graduated in 78. So at that time, it hit huge, and they had this huge vampire community that blossomed in the French Quarter, and it lasted well into the 80s and the 90s. There were a lot of people were just posers, just wanted to dress up like and just wanted to do that. Then there were the people who were called sanguine vampires, and at the time, they'd puncture their veins, and there's a lot of folk tales, and there's a lot of urban legends about. You really had to watch as much as you do today, basically for different reasons, who you went home with or who you were in the bar with or whatever, because the next thing you know, they're popping your vein and they're actually drinking your blood. And what kind of put the kibosh on that was AIDS. The HIV and the scare of that. So then they began to find other ways to do it. It survives in New Orleans in the form of the Anne Rice, the icon worship that they do every Halloween, where they have the Vampire Lestat ball, and in the Endless Nights balls, which Father Sebastian puts on. And so we always have one in New Orleans, but he has them all over the place. And apparently that and making fangs is his business. But before I bring Pete in, Bernadine knows me to be this way. This whole idea of the aristocrat, and I guess it was put into place by Stoker. But the idea of this, this fading aristocrat with the, dressed in his frock coat, getting out of his coffin every night, and, looking like Tom Cruise or whatever, and, going off into the city, the hinterlands of the city to find blood and all that. That is, and I'm sure you found this too, and you can tell me, Dacre, that is nothing like the vampire. Neither is, in fact, Dracula himself, that is known to the people in its homelands, to the people in Eastern Europe. The thing that they know is a spirit that comes out of the grave that is attached to the remains of the vampire. And there's this whole occult tradition behind it. But the spirit doesn't look like Tom Cruise. It doesn't look like the guy that died either. It comes out and it starts its depredations on the living that are closest to it, and then it expands. And unless they kill it, they find where it goes to, destroy that body and burn it up. It's going to continue until the body finally is nothing. Until there's, have you encountered that? Because when I talk about sparkly vampires, and we sometimes we give lectures on that, sometimes about the Twilight vampires and even Anne Rice's vampires, it is nothing like what put the fear in Eastern Europe because of all of the supernatural entities. This thing has to be annihilated in order to stop it, which makes it so, I don't know, so fearsome for everybody that encounters it. So what do you think about that, Dacre? How do you resolve that in your mind? Like,
Well,
the truth of the lore, and in the shadow of what your uncle wrote.
it's a very good question, and here's how I handle that, and that is, like you, I've done a ton of research, and I try to go back to the source. I try to do it two ways. One is I've researched what did Bram know? What was he? What did he have readily available to him? And we know that the London Library, we know the British Museum had a library. We know the Whitby had a library where he went because he kept really good notes and he kept listing those things. What we don't know is what other things he had access to that maybe didn't make it into these 125 pages of notes. I think there was a lot more. So what I tend to do is look at, see, what did the world know back in the 1700s when the plague was running around Europe, cholera was going around Europe, and we began to see the rise of these spirits that were not at rest. And that's what you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
is when people couldn't understand why other people died in unnatural ways. And natural death, no big deal. Somebody dies of old age, somebody gets injured in warfare, something like that, they can understand that. But when there were these communicable diseases or things that were just really strange that happened, they felt that this was going to be a problem, and so they had to go through a very intricate mourning process. And during the mourning process, if it wasn't adhered to properly, or the person committed suicide or something strange, let's just say we call it a strange death, that the general townsfolk would think that they've got a problem, and the spirit will come back and
Mm-hmm.
and take the life of the living or haunt the living. And as you mentioned earlier, exactly right, it normally went to family members first. Well, if you look at it this perspective, and you look at the tuberculosis outbreak in New England that Bram Stoker actually studied, it was exactly the same as the plague and other communicable diseases in Eastern Europe, where many treatises were written in the 1700s, that when a family was living in close quarters in New England in the 1900s and one person got the disease, and of course they cough up, little bits of fluid would come out of their mouth. Other people would breathe that in and they get tuberculosis.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't realize that. So the body was put in the grave, and when two or three other people in the family got sick, they immediately thought that the first guy that died, his soul was coming out and taking the blood and the life from the others. It also made it very easy to come to that conclusion, because tuberculosis caused you to spit out blood and have
Mm-hmm.
hallucinations and fevers and so on. So there was somewhat of a logical answer to what was haunting these people, because now we knew about germ theory and diseases being spread. They didn't know that at the time. And the easiest thing for them to do was to reach for superstition and folklore to answer their problems. And
Right.
so this is the sort of the source of all this. And yes, you had to kill these ones in certain ways. And some of them were opening up the grave and driving a stake into the heart, keeping the ground, taking the heart out, burning it at a crossroads, making
Mm-hmm.
a potion from all this and drinking it. And so I'll just stop on that part, because that's what Bram Stoker understood. And he and others, even before him, he didn't invent it. There was actually John Polidori who wrote
Mm-hmm.
about Lord Ruthven before him in The Vampire,
Mm-hmm.
and Carmilla by Le Fanu. They all utilized existing superstitions that I just explained and
Right.
turn them into these more modern beings. Even Bram's Dracula was not aristocratic. The movies did that.
Yeah.
And then Anne Rice did that, and others. So what has happened is what were much more zombie-like back in the original days, the writers and screenwriters and so on have morphed that being into something that's so human-like, and it looks more human and it acts more human in a way that it would make it believe it was one of us rather than an other being that we could easily identify. And what is scarier than knowing that there is somebody living next door to you or down the street that looks like you, acts like you, but if you don't watch out, as you said earlier, in a bar, boom, they're going to pop the vein and kill you. So
Exactly.
that's how, I mean, it's a really short version of how this has morphed into what we have today. And I think it's quite cool. I mean, I'm not a big fan of Twilight, but my God, it got people to read vampire stories, and it turned into paranormal romance. But it was pretty cool that Meyer invented the sparkly vampire that had different things. Anne Rice had her own things. Stephen King created his own tropes. Lots of different guys kind of took the idea that Polidori and Le Fanu and Stoker did and took it to great lengths. And that's why I've ended up today with just a boatload of vampire authors still digging up the past and keeping us on our toes.
And then, and I'm going to bring Pete in here in a minute. I just wanted to say, I don't know if you are a believer in the supernatural, but I am. I've had a cult, I'm an occultist. I've practiced, and I don't anymore. But this is where I am on the dark side of things. When Bernadine is a paranormal investigator, and when she encounters something that is obviously not your normal run-of-the-mill haunt, then she and I will talk about it. And there's usually an occult explanation in occult tradition for it. So the thing is yes, there were when the Black Plague came and they didn't understand. I mean, during the plagues of the third, and I know Stoker referred back to that too in his mind, thinking about the Black Death. They would wall the people up in their house. If one person broke out with a pustule on their arm or wherever, bricks went in the wall and they died in there. That's how serious that was. But as a supernatural researcher and an occultist, I know that all of that is still, as much as it is based on Pest Maiden and this and everything, and the actual science that we now know, there is a supernatural side to it that cannot be explained any other way. That once you take it out, there are supernatural creatures that are vampires, and everything else except possibly for those books you mentioned in your uncle's book, it's an almost it's almost caricature of that. The real vampires are real. So are werewolves, or so is lycanthropy, so are ghosts, so are demons. And the most informed people at the time was the church, and their records are full of actual accounts, walking corpses, actual things, opening the tombs. They were the ones that had to be there to open, and things being alive basically in there. So there's this whole supernatural side that goes to it that should give everybody pause, so that when I see Edward Cullen sparkling on a street in Verona, where the hell he was, I'm like, and what it did though, Dacre, and you may agree with this, is that now it's turned a thing that everybody used to fear and hunt down and kill into a romantic, tragic, misunderstood, sympathetic figure, and then they lose that connection that this thing is dangerous. If it is a human being that is really a vampire, that is inhabited by a vampire, or the spirit of a practitioner that really is now possessing the body of somebody, they're in for some, they could die. That thing will depredate them until it kills them. Almost, it'll make you sick, want to die, commit suicide. They're real. And whether they're described, as Dracula was, or Nosferatu, or it's, what the latest one is, Discovery of Witches, the way they can walk in the sun and they can drink wine and eat and all kind of stuff, which is pretty close. That's probably the best one. These things can kill you because there is a supernatural creature that is exactly that, and it will kill you. So I don't know where you stand on the supernatural, but I'm sure I'm sure you must be at least half 1 foot into it to, have written about it. But Pete, when Dacre finishes, you can jump in. Okay. How do you feel about that?
Let me say one thing. I'm going to give you guys a quote, and it tells it, and it'll tell you where I stand, but also where Bram stood, which I think was very advanced, very interesting. But it's a quote from Dracula, and we should spend a couple of minutes. I'm going to tell it to you now, and it'll be kind of cool if you guys could figure out where it came from in the novel, because it's exactly the argument that you just outlined very, very eloquently. And here it is: there are mysteries which men can only guess at, which age by age they may solve only in part. Okay.
And that's it. That's got to be Van Helsing.
That's Van Helsing, and who's he saying that to? Any idea?
Now,
Dr. Was it Andrew?
To who?
Hello?
Was it Andrew?
Andrew?
No,
not Andrew. I'm sorry. The
Seward.
Yeah, Seward. Yeah. I know you saw the W too. We're just
It's the classic.
I didn't get the name.
Yeah, Dr. Seward is what
Seward.
I was
So it's Van Helsing that is a little bit scientist, a little bit supernatural expert, a little bit occult guy from the East. He gets it, and Seward was not accepting the fact that anything that he could not prove with a scientific method. Now, this was exactly what was a major issue going on in Victorian England. Charles Darwin had recently, 1859, had published Origin of the Species. Dracula came out in 1897. Bram was obviously born 1847, so he kind of grew up with Origin of the Species. And all these people are arguing about, is this right, is this wrong, or is it God's will, and so on. So this was the argument between proving something scientifically, and in this case, why is Lucy losing all his blood? Van Helsing is trying to say, look, just because we can't explain it, because we can't put our hands on it, because it doesn't make sense to modern present-day scientific explanation, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. There are mysteries which men can only guess at, which age by age they may solve only in part. And that's how I believe about the paranormal. I may not be able to put my hands on it, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Maybe my brain is not able to comprehend. Maybe my eyes don't see well enough. Maybe I don't get the senses that animals do that pick up presence of things. Just because I don't doesn't mean it's not there. And that is what is so cool about Dracula, is that Bram brought that to our attention and made people realize at that time that it's a possibility that these vampires really do exist, and you better watch out for them. That's how I feel to this day.
I can say, and then I'm going to let Pete jump in, I can say that I don't know how Seward could sit there in a mental asylum with all of this now going on too outside and not look at them and say, really, are these people, obviously Renfield was going crazy, but really, is this mental illness? Or is this something taking the body of someone or attaching to their spirit and suppressing the spirit? And these are well-known things today in paranormal research, or they should be if you're at all into supernatural research or the actual, identification of what these supernatural beings are. But Pete, you would probably have something to say about the science and the proving beyond a shadow of a doubt. So maybe can you say something about that?
Well, the questions I actually have don't really lean into that yet. I'm along the lines as I think what Baker was talking about is that we really don't know exactly what's out there, and to be honest, we really won't know the answers until we get there. So it's kind of all experimentation and conjecture, really. But my questions I have are how much did Vlad the Impaler have to do with his writing? And while you were also researching your uncle, even back as early as you can remember, what was some of the information that you came across that you just found astounding?
Good questions. Let's start with Vlad. Also, this recent discovery in the London Library has opened the eyes of the scholars who, up until like 6 months ago, the last 30 years, all the biographies had said Bram Stoker saw one book. that contained the name Dracula. It was by William Wilkinson. It was called The Accounts of Principalities of Wallachia and Moldavia, and it was in the Whitby subscription library. And luckily, I've been able to photograph some of the pages of that book to see that there was very little about Vlad the Impaler. And I'll just kind of sum it up, just saying it mentioned Dracula in the Wallachian language means devil. Wilkinson didn't know that it also meant dragon, so he only wrote devil, and it was given to somebody who displayed cruel actions, cunning, or great courage under battle. It didn't go into anything else about Vlad's kind of colorful history and that sort of thing. But what's really interesting is that in the London Library there was another book, and this book by a guy called James Samuelson was actually referred in Bram's notes, and I'd seen it a couple of years ago where it said C. Samuelson, page 149, and I actually figured out what that book was because it said C. Samuelson's Romania. So I went to Abe Books and got a copy of that book and went and read through it, and it actually mentioned that Vlad Dracula was known as the devil, and he did these horrible atrocities both to his people and to his enemies. He impaled people, these visiting envoys from Turkey. He nailed their turbans into their head when they refused to take them off to bow to him. All this kind of really grotesque kind of stuff.
Yeah, and he was something else.
He was something else, but I'm not going to defend him as much as put it in perspective, Pete.
No, I'm just
because what we understand now is that the Samuelson book was in the London Library. Bram had access to read a lot about him, and I've now been to Romania 7 times. I actually lead tours over there, and I've done some filming of Mysteries of the Museum and Legend Hunters and different shows over there.
I want to go on a tour.
So I've got to know what scholars, what young people, what old people, what educated, what non-educated. I try to talk to a lot of different people. I'm there. Basically, Vlad was a hero. Even though he was a brutal ruler, he, in perspective, a guy that had about 4,000 people in his makeshift army was able to hold off the Ottoman Empire.
Yep.
And for like 7.5 years, 3 different reigns. And he got jungle, it's kind of this mountain warfare, all these kind of cool things that he did to save his people. But the fact was, this little country was 3 different provinces, and that if he didn't essentially kick ass and scare the heck out of the different rulers to pay him money so he could hire an army or give their militia to Vlad to defend, he finally got up to an army of 40,000 to fight off 400,000. But he had to do all these different tactics of poisoning his own wells with diseased cattle. So when the invading army came, they had nothing to eat. He burnt the land, scorched earth. They were dying because they were drinking the bad water, and all their people would run up in the mountains and hide until all the Ottomans went home. So Bram knew a lot more than we thought. But the bottom line is he knew that Vlad was a good prototype for what he wanted. But Vlad was not a vampire. The fact was, they did have vampire lore over there in that country. They had it in Bulgaria, they had it in Serbia, they had it in Poland, they had it in Austria. And luckily, he read a book by a Scottish lady by Emily Gerard all about those superstitions. So once again, he did his research. Vlad just happened to have the right name. The fact that it was devil, that was one of the names that Dracula stood for in that language, I think also suited his purpose, because Bram was looking for some kind of antichrist type symbol. He did a lot of research into religious conflict, good versus evil and so on, and so he fit the bill. So that's part A of the question. The second part is what really kind of blew me away about Bram, and I think when I discovered his journal, and this has nothing to do with Dracula, Pete. I found this in his grandson's attic in the Isle of Wight, and it was something that any of us on this podcast would have if we were writers, and it sounds like a bunch of us are. That you keep a commonplace book of ideas, of things to write about later, really cool stuff that happened that day. Not a traditional diary like, oh, today we've got the show with Dacre Stoker on it, 9:30 Central.
Right.
It would be, oh, got a really cool idea. Saw this person doing something. Need to use this. And
Yep.
so I found this, and it was like 311 entries, and it showed me that Bram Stoker was a man that was very aware of everything going on around him. Everything from, women being treated poorly to, really weird Irish party drinking games, people vomiting and sliding in the vomit, like gatoring, and vomit.
Ooh.
A real observer of people.
Yeah, but it was all kinds of that stuff that over 11 years the guy kept. And I think to kind of wrap up this part of it,
I'm on the vomit thing. I'm sorry. Just happening. I had a mental image.
It was funny when the ground got dry. They said, let's bring another guy over and have him vomit here so we can slide in.
God.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine.
Man.
So he was a guy aware of a lot of things and cared enough to write about them. But deep inside, back to
you need
your
to
college
pull from anyway.
What?
I'm sorry, say that again.
You need to have those characters to pull from, even if it's
exactly.
Even if it's
exactly.
a character, minor character. You have, writing. When I do writing, when I do writing, that was good.
You do writing?
Yeah. I don't. No, but to have the real observation to pull from, to add to. That's where you get what you're wanting to do.
Atmosphere.
I know exactly. Yeah, what you're talking about, other than taking out the vomit, it's like someone will do, or they'll do something like that, and it'll strike you if you have something that you're working on. Oh, I need a character like that. Or you'll be reading some book from the 15th century, let's say, or the 16th century, and you'll be like, oh, like I need a priest, I need this kind of a character priest, or a cleric or whatever, it'll come up in your mind, like, and I do that, and I guess I'm getting better at it, as I get older. But I do that. I'll stop, I'll write it, actually my phone, I'll make a note. I'm so full of notes on the phone. Oh, you should have this and this, so I'm doing that, and I'm amazed to hear that he did that. That's how it's like another thing I'm doing right, from Bram Stoker. That's just amazing. But the vomit, no, that's just not happening. But I will say this about Vlad. You're right about, well, and you're right. It's like you didn't know you were right before I said that. But you're right about Vlad, because I'm Gypsy by descent on one side of my family, and I'm doing a lot of research into the origins of the Gypsies, etc., and all the books and paperwork and everything that I can find on it. They came with their legends about the Bhuta and the vampires, the Rakshasa, and all of this. They brought that, and they were coming in front of the Ottomans, in front of Genghis Khan, Tamerlane, and the Turks and the Ottomans. The Muslims drove them out of their homeland and toward Europe. And when they got into Europe, they added to what was already an existing folklore, like existing folk beliefs about those creatures, and there were new names. And the Gypsies, we have there is a complete, just a whole pantheon of these types of creatures, and every single one of them has to be killed. And you're right, in where it starts in the Gypsy mind is with the death. They are so uptight about a dead person. There have been times, and I've read accounts, where they'd be traveling along and one of them dies, and they bury him right there on the road. They bury him on the side of the road, and then they go on. It's such a they have this, their whole lives, basically, instead of being like controlled by, I don't know, money gain, whatever people think gypsies are, they have a very morbid sense of propriety when it comes to death. And I'm sure you've seen this. If something jumps over the coffin,
Oh yeah.
they could be a vampire. They bury more stuff in that coffin with that dead gypsy. It's like, here, put the fiddle in. Here's some money. Here's this other suit. Here's anything that he could possibly need in the other world. Put it in
Pass
that
on to the
coffin,
other world.
right?
Yeah.
So that A, he'll be happy over there, and B, he will not come back. They would go to the extent of burning every possession this person ever had, including their Vardo, including everything in it. If the person, especially if the person had died inside the Vardo, and they will go so far in some tribes as never to mention the name again. The name of that person is never mentioned again. And yet they'll like go on their circuit. Well, they don't do it as much anymore, but obviously I'm talking about the same time that your uncle was writing in. They would take a year or so and cycle back, and then on the anniversary of the death, they would visit the grave, and they would sit, and some women have been known to like pick out the grass in the cracks and whisper into the graves, talk to their dead husbands or their dead family members. So that is true. And they had a bigger fear of the Muslims than they had of anything in Eastern Europe. And when they got to Wallachia, they were enslaved. They were enslaved from the end of the 1300s until 1869 officially. But it was better than living with the Turks over here, so yeah, I can see why he poisoned the wells and impaled people. Vlad wanted people to know, I'm a mean son of a bitch, and I'm going to do this to you. If you come to my land, I'll kill all of you if I have to. And that's perfect. That's why I'm sitting there going, yay, Vlad, everything that you're talking about. I'm like, yeah, Vlad, because he's the guy. So I would too. I'd keep the Turks out that way. So Dean, you got anything? Any other question?
Yeah, it's kind of a crazy question, but I've always wondered, even in the cartoons, they do this. What is the connection between Dracula and him turning into a bat?
Yeah, that's a good question. Here's what I know. There's a couple of guys that I follow their blogs of, and they've tried to sort of look at these original tropes about when did a vampire and a bat get connected? When did the mirror thing, no reflection? Where did all these things start from? And this is what I've come to gather. Again, it's this newspaper article from the New York World in 1896. So it was the year before Dracula came out. People think from Bram's notes it took him between 1890 and 1897 to write Dracula, and he went to America 8 times while he was writing Dracula, and one of them was in 1896. So he was writing Dracula, when he was in New York. And in this newspaper article, it actually mentioned this tuberculosis outbreak that people believed was vampirism. And essentially what it was people from the old country had come to America to work in the mines, in the coal mines, and the logging industry that brought these same superstitions with them. And so it was deep into obviously not understanding what was causing the deaths and so on. But also in the same article, they mentioned that Charles Darwin published The Origin of the Species, as I mentioned earlier, 1859, and while he was in South America, he recognized that there was a bat that came out of the trees and drank the blood from horses, and he called it the vampire bat. And that was the first time that any scientist had recognized a blood-drinking bat. And so what is really bizarre, not so bizarre, maybe when I think about it, Bram took those words from that same article and had Quincy Morris say the same thing while the discussion was going on amongst the band of heroes in the novel Dracula. Van Helsing trying to explain to Seward, as I said earlier, about, there's a vampire here. What do you mean by vampires? How could this possibly be? Oh, yes, there's even bats. And Quincy Morris said, yes, when I was in South America on these military maneuvers, on hunting trips, I should say, we saw these big bats come out of trees and drink the blood from my favorite horse. It drank so much I had to put her down.
Amazing.
And that was Bram taking science and pulling it from the newspaper and sticking it into fiction, and therefore making that what I believe to be, and I could be wrong, but I believe to be, that is the first time in a vampire novel that a bat was connected to sort of justifying a fictional creature, the superstition creature, which was, you know, how these guys justified and made sense of tuberculosis and the plague and so on, towards, oh my God, but there's this bat thing that flies around a real one that drinks the blood, and that made that connection.
I think you're right. That's the first, yeah.
And it also created helped create the iconic character.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow. Vlad can do. You know, Count Dracula can do this. He can turn into, well, and the same time the werewolf situation. He found a book by Sabine Baring-Gould about werewolves. It's called The Book of Werewolves. That was one of Bram's research books, and it mentioned people in Romania. You know, it was a really, again, explainable situation. Nighttime, animals were getting lost, people were getting killed. You know, these creatures of the night, the bats, the wolves, and so on. Well, there was this biologist from France that came over to, this was back in the 1700s, that came over to Romania to do study of plants, and it was cold, and the guy had a wolf fur coat on. And these old ladies from their villages, they would look down into the valley and they'd see this thing on its hands and knees. Had no idea why a person would be on their hands and knees looking at plants with this kind of furry coat, and it would stand up on its legs, on its and walk away. And they felt, the way they explained this, so my God, that's got to be a werewolf. So they went and shot the guy.
Oh, okay.
So again, that's
because they already knew about the werewolf, and they was like, "Oh, Jesus, one is near our village," so they go and kill him.
That's right. That's right.
Well,
That's their own right there.
What about sunlight and the vampire having being destroyed by sunlight? What caused that?
Okay.
Yeah, and the lack of reflection in the mirror also.
Yeah.
Right. So in Bram's notes, there's 4 pages of these tropes. All these.
Okay.
And he's pulled these out of these different books.
Okay.
And the one cool book for you guys to look at if you want to follow up on this is Emily Gerard. She was a Scottish lady but living in Romania, and it's called The Land Beyond the Forest. And there's 2 volumes, and she was really interested because she was Scottish, and the Scottish people have a lot of their very own superstitions about weird stuff. About the devil and all this kind of, so she took this interest and took it there, and just as you had said earlier about these morning rituals, about if a cat jumps over the grave, or a horse does this, all these different things Bram listed. One was painters can't reproduce him, no reflection in a mirror, always pays with old gold, can change, has power over rats, and my understanding of this is, if you think about it, going back to your sunlight, is that most of these superstitions grew from things that happened at night. Okay. The unknown, the bad time of the day. Daytime, we're working in the fields, we're working hard, we come in, it's nighttime. Okay, that's when the evil shit goes on. Come inside. Okay, we want you in the house. Come home.
You're exactly
Come home
right.
by nightfall. And so at nighttime, this is when all evil things will have full sway, especially when there's full moons and all that kind of stuff.
Absolutely.
So of course, it's dark, and that's when Dracula will do his thing. But when the sun comes up, now in Dracula, the novel, the vampire could actually walk around in the sunlight. He just didn't have his power. It was the movie Nosferatu that first introduced the sort of the melting of, or the killing of, the vampire.
Oh yeah,
that's right. Yeah, and then everybody has done different things. Sometimes you've got a little bit of power. Sometimes you burst into flames. Sometimes you sparkle. So they've played with that because it's good versus bad. It's day versus night.
You're right. I will tell you, wait,
What
Pete,
about?
let me just jump in real quick. The thing
All right.
that we don't understand as modern people, I mean, I'm 58, okay, and I've never known a time except when there's a hurricane that we didn't have electric lights or anything electrical. You
Yeah.
have to put
Yeah.
when you look at that, either as a writer or as a historian or somebody who's interested in, what we're talking about, folklore and legend, you have to put yourself in the mindset of the people. And 1800s, there were large swaths of Europe that were just still even there were forested now, but consider maybe you're in the 1500s, okay? When sunset came, you went in and locked your door because night
Yeah.
was as dark as night was meant to be. If you were caught out on the road, you had to hurry up quick and either get to an inn, or you had to have protection in the form of talismans, charms, rosary, whatever it was, until you got from where you were to a place of habitation. If you were in a plane or you were a bird flying over Europe at night, an owl, there would be gray areas where there were fields and everything else would be black. That's, I mean, it's, you have to put yourself in that. We really, unless we have gone out, like, I don't know, maybe under the sea or, deep in a cave, right? We can't conceive of that kind of darkness. So that they would ring the bells, the church would do vespers, and you were in your house, you locked the door, and you didn't get up or go out until the sun came up. And Dacre's exactly right. Everything bad went on in the dark, and woe betide if there was something going on and you had to go out there to see what it was. The werewolf, the vampire, what other, the zombie walking down the streets of the village or whatever. That, we just can't conceive of how dark that is, and that kind of darkness where you would want to secure yourself away from it because it in and of itself was a threat. It contained everything that was fearful. So Dacre's absolutely right. So go on, Pete. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's okay. I was just curious to see, and maybe it just has to do with manners, but a vampire could not come into a home unless he was invited.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a good point. And I don't think it's manners. Here's what I don't have an answer to that. This is just my feeling on why it is.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's because whoever created it needed to give some degree of protection to humanity,
Mm-hmm.
to the people. And the difference is, okay, here we are on the show. If we go into our house of refuge, we go into our home, we're safe, unless some idiot gets tricked and invites the vampire in. Okay.
Right.
Okay. You open the window, you leave the window open. You're still okay unless someone says, "Come on in." On the other hand, think of all the other monsters. They can break down the door. They break the window. You are have no conscious opportunity to make a conscious decision to say, I am going to invite the person or not invite them in. Frankenstein can break down the door if I want him or not. So I think that in a way it gave the victims, sort of an opportunity and decision making here, even though sometimes they would get tricked to invite them in. It made it just a little more. You were vulnerable, but not completely vulnerable. Does that make sense?
It does.
No, it makes perfect sense. That makes perfect sense. Unfortunately, you'd have to let him in a couple of times to find out that you're not supposed to let him in.
No, you'd only
right.
need to let that in once, okay? If that was his intention, you only needed to let it in one time.
I'm talking about just a different instances.
Yeah.
But it also has something to do, Dacre, I think, with the idea, the folklore around how you treat your guests. In other words, inviting them in and how you treat them. I mean, there are like legends around, people who invited people to the house and killed all those people when they got there, and how bad that was. How terrible a thing that you would killed. You invite a guest to your home and then you kill them. Of course, in this instance, conversely, you're inviting death in. Even, I mean, he may not kill you, but you give him that invitation. And also the idea of the threshold. The threshold is in magical
Right, good point.
practices, right? Yeah, you throw salt on the threshold. You put brick dust if you're doing voodoo or whatever, but your threshold, your windows, everything is protected. Garlic, which is something that I wanted to bring up about, and what you thought about the garlic and everything, yeah, I think they've layered that on, like you said, since Stoker wrote the novel, successive, incarnations with the garlic and all. But actually, in occult tradition and in practice, garlic, onions, lilies, everything that's a bulb plant, shallots, leeks, anything like that has a chemical called allicin in it. And what it
Yeah.
does, what it produces is it makes the atmosphere unconducive to manifestation. It influences the etheric atmosphere. So the garlic so there was a folk tradition, put the garlic in, that's my dog, by the way, put the garlic in the room, because it would keep him from, not just from, hissing and going away. He couldn't manifest. He couldn't, either as a bat, a spirit, or a human, whatever form he chose to take, he wouldn't be able to manifest because of the chemical that was putting into the atmosphere. I don't know whether Stoker knew that, or he was just picking up on the old legends about it. But as it turns out, yeah, one of the best things to do to
Here's what
protect
Bram
yourself.
picked up. He picked up that garlic had been used since the Egyptian days as a cleansing, a blood cleanser. It's for health purposes. So if it can cleanse the blood, can you take it proactively to repel something from hurting your blood? That
Right.
was his rationale for using it. So I don't think he quite got what you're talking about. That probably came a little bit later, but his was, it does go back to early Egyptian days when it made sense.
It's a magical.
It's like taking vitamins. Can I take a whole bunch of vitamins to stop me from getting sick, or only take them once I get sick? That's
the more
whole
it's
idea
like
of
the
garlic.
more the better. Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's actually like, even today when Bernadine and I'll have somebody who says this is going on in their home, I will tell, that's the first thing I'll tell them: increase the garlic in their diet, actually put it out, bring in lilies, vinegar in the atmosphere and everything. Those old folksy remedies are actually based in actual truth. And then when you're dealing with something on a supernatural level, unseen, for instance, I mean, we haven't yet, Dean and I haven't encountered, Dracula yet, but you never know. But we've encountered some very bad entities, demonic and evil entities, and you protect the environment, or you treat the environment before you focus in on whether or not, if you could drive it away. If it's something elemental or fairy or whatever, you can drive it away with natural additions to the environment. Sunlight is an actual etheric cleanser. Nothing can really withstand sunlight. And sun in the home, along with garlic, vinegar, etc., it should drive out and keep away anything that's trying to get in. And I still do that. That's what we recommend every time we talk to somebody. And usually it works. I'm sorry, that's my dog. Usually it works, and it gives the person a sort of an ammunition, a way to help themselves, because that's also important, is that they feel like you were saying, leaving a vestige of humanity, the choice of inviting the vampire in or not. It also it arms them with something. They feel proactive, that I can do this. I can put this vinegar here, and I'll bring in these flowers and let sunlight in, all of which is a good thing, no matter what. I mean, not just supernatural. And if it improves, then you feel like you've been engaged. You don't need to call in, the cavalry, Pete and Bernadine, with the whole, deploying everything. If you can drive it away, or assuage it, or assuage yourself with natural remedies. And this goes back, I mean, this is gypsies, Romans, Egyptians. You're right. I mean, the thing is, and I want to ask you this just came up. The first vampire, quote unquote, often called, is Lilith, the female vampire. And so that's how old the myth or the legends were. So was there any reference anywhere beyond, like, his contemporaries with Camilla or Castle of Otranto? Did he ever reach back into like the ancient Judaic legends of Lilith and the Lilitu and all of that?
No, and that's obviously a lot of people have looked into that because for the same reason you are. It's like, what did Bram know, as opposed to what do we now have access to? And the problem is, as you kind of said earlier about light and where we're living now. Back in those days, information wasn't all that readily available. It's lucky that people in London had money and wrote books and had libraries and put them in there that gave Bram an opportunity to go and look and read them. So even though years later we found out how many different countries actually had superstitions that involved blood-sucking creatures or entities sort of like that, Bram did actually give one interview, and one of them was to a lady called Jane Stoddard in the British Weekly about 3 months after Dracula came out, and said, "Where did this myth come from?" He said, "Well, it comes from both mystery and fact." He said, the vampire depopulated many villages in the Middle Ages. And she said, "Where is this?" And he listed off like 13 different countries that had folklore of some kind that he was able to study. And he actually went, when you look through Dracula, and you've got these scenes where Van Helsing is explaining to the band of heroes where the stuff comes from. He lists most of these countries, but I think that I know there was a reference, because again, I follow these guys' blogs and Facebook posts and so on, that the vampire in Russia was also very, very early. But I think I'm correct in saying Lilith was probably the first one that most people have come to an agreement is the first one. But I don't believe Bram knew about that.
Right. Well, it comes to, Judaic, it could have been, I don't know if he researched, they were so well-rounded. They had, they had the best educations in knowing, what they had, even in Egyptian, and a lot of it's in the Book of the Dead, the Ba and the Ka, and the way the Egyptians, what they thought remained with the body, and why, they would feed it and take, this is, it's complicated, but with the switching up of the religion, where they changed it, a lot of the altars went or a lot of the dead weren't fed, and so they had this outbreak of vampires. Basically, they had this outbreak of hungry spirits that would go feed on everybody in the nearby village when they weren't being fed normally, so their spirit wasn't being fed. But before we run out of time, because this has been great, I want to talk to you about your book. I want to talk about Dracul, and from what I understand, it's the prequel. That is the prequel to Dracula that you've written. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I'll kind of give you a short version of what J.D. Barker and I came up with. And essentially, it is the origin story of Bram Stoker writing Dracula, as if the story of Dracula was written as a warning to the world that vampires are real. So I looked into Bram's life, as I've done for 10 years, and I said, well, what happened in his life that could have led this way? And the one thing that jumps out to me, having been a teacher and athletics coach myself, was Bram had a very strange, undiagnosed illness for the first 7 years of his life. And he was near death. They didn't expect him to live, and somehow he did. But not only did he live, he turned into a champion athlete. And so I started thinking, how the hell does that happen? How do you go from nothing to being a champion athlete? Obviously recover from something. But what are the diseases going around at the time? What could he have had that debilitated him for 7 years, and then you recover quickly from and go on? So I looked into scarlet fever, rheumatic fever. All these things have different sort of residual effects on the body, which he couldn't have had. But I do believe it was something more like asthma or respiratory allergies, because as he moved inland away from the mildew and sort of atmosphere around the ocean, and the beds they used to live on were straw, that he recovered. Now, the athlete side of me, the coach side of me said, well, this is kind of cool. Maybe in modern day, he would have had human growth hormones or steroids like Lance Armstrong or something and become the super athlete. Well, that's no good if you want to write a vampire novel. So JD and I were thinking, okay, what happens if he actually had some vampire blood, and that he made a deal with the devil, or his mother did, to make him whole again, make him better. And of course, then he becomes super strong. But then you got to pay the piper, and then you've got hell to pay. And that's sort of our story. So we've done a ton of research in things that Bram actually researched himself. The manuscript that's missing 102 pages that Paul Allen owns, the Dracula notes, the another version of Dracula that was published in Iceland and Sweden, which is an early version that we looked at, and we took all these kind of things and we said, and we made a very plausible story that this is the prequel to Dracula. And that's what is really cool, because I mean, it's been setting the world on fire. The reviews are amazing. We're the #1 horror hardcover novel sold in the UK. We're up for a Bram Stoker award for novel
You
of
should,
the year.
and yeah, you should walk away with that. I'm just kidding. It's like, let's just by default. And they're going to make a movie out of it. That you said Paramount Pictures bought the rights, so that's
Paramount bought the
astonishing.
rights, and the ball's in their park to go with it. JD and I don't have much to say about that, other than we hope they do a good job. But the cool thing is they have attached Andy Muschietti, who is the director that adapted Stephen King's novel It into a movie, and 2 summers ago they did It 1, and this summer It #2 is coming out, the second chapter. So if all goes well, they will move ahead and turn Dracul into hopefully a really good movie, and we'll be real happy.
And you're going to thank him. You're going to go put some flowers and say some masses or whatever for him, huh? Because I mean, basically, the way that it is you find stuff when you're supposed to find it. Basically, if you'd have found it at another part of your time in your life, you'd have said, "This is all cool," but you had other stuff going on. Now you're at a point in your life. And I mean, it's amazing. It does happen. I mean, look at Game of Thrones, right? George Martin, I mean, I know what they did. My daughter and I talk about it. They're like, okay, we're going to do this, okay, and we're going to do it like we want. He said, yeah, okay, because it's the biggest thing on earth. So it would be good to see that kind of a story, because frankly, I'm just kind of tired of the, the old, I don't know, the retread of, it's become a retread of like Anne Rice, and we need more of that.
Let me tell you, our vampire is a kick-ass. He is not. There's no frills. This is the type you would like. He's for real.
Yeah, because I don't, but that brings me to, I mean, I wish you the best luck. And, even now, you're going to come back on our show, right? I mean, I want to hear more about it and everything. But let me ask you a question. Of all the adaptations, and I mean, there's been a bunch, okay? There's been Nosferatu. There were the Hammer films. There was poor Bela Lugosi, who got typecast until like the world changes as Dracula, and who was Hungarian and didn't speak English when he made the movie, all the way through Penny Dreadful, to, I mean, what has been Gary Oldman. I love Coppola's version. It's got Keanu Reeves, who can't act in that worth a darn, but he still looks good, and Gary Oldman. So that's kind of like my favorite to look at, right? But what's your favorite adaptation, or which ones do you like the most?
Well, I'm not going to get pinned in a corner saying one, because there are a lot that I like.
I gave you a little wiggle room there.
No, you did. I actually have got to be quite good friends with Jim Hart, who's the screenwriter for the 92 Coppola version, and we've actually done presentations together. And actually, it is a really good version. Gary Oldman did an incredible job. Anthony Hopkins was a really good Van Helsing. But you also have to realize they took liberties and they changed the story to become this love story of a reincarnated Vlad Dracula's wife. But therefore it's 85% like Bram's story. But I still liked it. In 1997, the BBC did a Louis Jourdan version of Dracula, which was very realistic to the book, very similar. But Hammer did all kinds of different versions. And I love Christopher Lee, but some of the versions, we're obviously, son of, daughter of, all this stuff. By the way, next week, I'm heading to England. I'm actually appearing with a bunch of the ladies from the Hammer Horror ladies, Carolyn Monroe, Martine Beswick, in Whitby. We're going to be doing a big day together where we talk about Dracula and show film clips and talk about that stuff. So it's all good, but I think if I really had to come down to it, the 97 Louis Jourdan and the 92 Coppola were probably my two favorites. But you got to give Bella credit because, as you said, a guy that couldn't speak English, had to speak phonetically, he became that, that kind of classic Dracula that we all think of, and so he gets great credit for that. It did change his life, and he ended up being buried as an alcoholic with his cape on, and he loved it to death.
In his vampire suit, yeah. And I think he left like, "Do not bury me in it," and they buried him in it. So, and I think that was just, he hated being typecast because, good sake he was.
Agreed.
But I have to agree with you on the Coppola one. I do like what Penny Dreadful did with it, at least in the first and second season. But the first season, I don't know where they went with the third season, because they were setting the whole Egyptian thing up in the first season with those vampires. They did all of, the background with the Mina and Jonathan Harker and all this. And I thought, surely they'll go to Egypt in the third season. And then they go right back to Dracula, and the guy doesn't do any good, and he really doesn't do a good job of it. So I got thoroughly confused, and as an author, the guy failed his characters, he failed everything. So it was like, cancel out the third season. But I did like the first season, and I thought that's where it was going, into a monster. And I do hope yours is a monster.
Oh yeah,
because
I'll tell you one thing I'm looking
be
forward to.
Afraid of this thing. They really do.
This is a scary one, but I'll end with this. I'm really looking forward, and I've got great hopes for the Moffat and Gaddis version of Dracula that the BBC's putting out this year, the series. The NBC one with Jonathan Rhys Meyers really sucked, but this one I hope will bring it, put us back on track as far as a modern day version. If Moffat and Gaddis can't do it, I don't know who the heck can. So hopefully that's it.
When is that coming out? When is that? Do you know when that's going to be out?
It's supposed to be out this fall, I believe.
Excellent. We'll keep looking for that. Yeah. That's great. Well, it has been phenomenal. And as a gypsy, the gypsy says, beware as a vampire. I'm telling you. it creeps me
I'm always
out.
beware.
And I don't like people running around, pretending to be vampires, because if they've met a real vampire, they would, themselves, and they'd drop dead on the spot, So I'm glad, because you're kind of you're being responsible, saying, hey, wait a minute, it's great, this thing is really bad, and let's show you. So I'm really looking forward to that. And I got your book on Kindle. I'm going to be reading it tonight. I read a couple of chapters already, so I'm looking forward to that. But thank you so much for being here.
Welcome.
This has been a great, and you're welcome back anytime. We'll set you up whenever you got a new book or something to talk about. That's great. Come back and join us. This has been great. So guys, you want to say goodbye to our guests?
Thank you very much.
Get a hold of me later, and maybe we can schedule you this year later in the future.
Yeah, after you come back from your trips. Thank you so much, Dacre. And we wish you the best.
I appreciate it.
All righty. Good night.
Okay.
Thank
Good night. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.